I'm really excited to introduce our next speaker. He is the president of McChrystal Group and the author of 2 best-selling books, Team of Teams, New Rules of Engagement for a Complex World, and At One Mission, How Leaders Build a Team of Teams. So I think this is really relevant because as many of you are thinking about the challenges that you face transforming into software organizations, into organizations that are great at building software, you're going to invariably run into challenges about enabling your teams to work in a new way. So how do you help people remove silos? How do you help them decentralize decision-making? How do you allow people to execute independently with all the context they need to be successful? So our next speaker is absolutely a thought leader in this space. His experience helping teams learn how to adapt quickly to be and let organizations be flatter and faster should be able to resonate with everyone here. So please join me in welcoming Chris Fussell.
All right, good morning. Thanks for letting me be the second speaker of the day. Hope everyone's day is off to a great start. I'm going to take a few minutes here this morning and try to capture for folks here what I think is the biggest takeaway from our experiences in the military, specifically in the special operations community during this generation. And you may immediately think, well, that's sort of frontline stuff, changes in tactics, smaller things on the battlefield, leadership lessons at the small team level. And all that's very important. But in my view, and what we've been focused on inside the McChrystal Group for the past 7 years, has been trying to think about how organizations function. Because I believe that was the most critical lesson that I saw during my time in the military and on the front lines. Now, all the other stuff is really important. But I think you'll see the parallels between the world you live in and our experiences in this environment come through strikingly clear when you consider how organizations think, how they act, how they operate in a world that is significantly different now than it was 20 years ago. And obviously, everyone in this room lives in the middle of that idea, and it changes your lives on a daily basis. Right? No other space is moving and changing as fast as the world that everyone here is experiencing. So we'll start with this big idea, and this is rather pedestrian to most of the folks in this room, I'm sure. But going back 10 years or so, this was new thinking, especially for us in the military. We didn't recognize the fact that we were raised inside traditional systems, these hierarchies, bureaucratic models on the left, and we were suddenly facing a networked threat on the right. It seems quite obvious in retrospect. But at the time, this was difficult for us to get our heads around. And what we didn't realize was the systems on the left drive behavior, both at the individual and team level, but then also in your decision-making process that simply doesn't align with countering a threat that manifests in a network model. Now, our thinking is not an attack on industrial age models. Oh, throw them away, they don't work anymore, et cetera. You hear that a lot, and I think it's quite risky. Because there's a lot of good that comes out of those systems. You know, if you like the building we're in right now, if you like the fact that airplanes don't fall out of the sky, you can thank the systems on the left. They've done a lot of work throughout all of our lives and previously, ensuring all those little things work in society. They're stable, they're predictable, they're highly efficient. All those are good things. But they're an insufficient list in today's environment, in a networked age. The information age models, that's a simple way of saying it. Networks have been around for as long as there have been people on the planet. But something has shifted. Historically, they have a problem, right? They're unstable. They can only get so big before they start to collapse or transition into a hierarchical model like that on the left. But that was before the information age, right? Because you had to form a network based on who you know and how many faces you could remember. Many here are probably familiar with Dunbar's number, the upper limit of network connectivity. What shifted is that we can all pick up devices and connect with whomever we want. That's the one big change that I think all of us missed 15 or 20 years ago, and the one that hit us head on the battlefield. We hadn't foreseen the possibility that terror networks could hit a limitless scale. And that's a bit hyperbolic, but they can get as big as they want because you can talk to whomever likes your ideas. And now we see that manifesting almost anywhere we look. And nowhere is that more true than in the technology space. Obviously, you're at the center of that shift, and you have been for quite a while. So that was the problem we were wrestling with, right? Now, inside of our group now, we look at organizations through this lens. And a common pattern that you'll see is something like this. If you measure a high-performing big organization, you'll see a networked senior leadership team. The C-suite, the executives, they get together and they spend a lot of time. They go to offsites. They're talking constantly. You see high-performance teams on the ground. Many of you are probably in or lead teams like that in your daily lives. That's true in tech. It's true in medicine. It's true in the military. This is an emergency room team, an R&D team, a SEAL platoon. And in the middle, generations previous to us have purpose-built, very stable structures designed to connect those two. Big ideas, long-term strategy, financial decisions, high-performance elements on the ground that can execute well, and a disciplined group in the middle that makes sure it doesn't turn into chaos. That's the system that we went into the fight with, right? On the ground, we had high-performance teams. They were underneath a structure, a command structure, that had bolted together exceptional units. For years, we'd been given the authorities to pull together the best counterterrorism units out there, put them under one central command. For 20 years, we'd lived inside that system, and the only thing we were focused on was the capability of that high-performance, very networked team on the ground. 20 folks. One problem, one team. That's how the world had worked for generations. And as a result, the latter half of the 20th century, we had also allowed ourselves to become exceptionally siloed and highly tribal. We'd adopted that same network, rigid middle pattern that is ubiquitous throughout many high-performance organizations. And it was a classic black swan problem. We didn't understand how much of a threat this would actually be until we got forward into a fight where networks were the dominant player. So we stepped back and said, okay, our teams on the ground are effective. We know that. We can measure that. We see it every night. What makes them exceptional, and how can we scale that up into the organization? So for years now, we've been focused on finding these drivers inside an organization. What are the levels of trust? Do they have a common sense of purpose? Do they have a single mission focus? And is the leadership constantly reminding the organization of what that is? Have they developed shared consciousness? Small teams have this. Everyone can see and has access to the right information in the moment. And if you have these three factors, you can then create what we refer to as empowered execution. Truly allowing those closest to the problem to move with highly informed autonomy. And being able to create a system of accountability for that. Not feel-good, touchy-feely empowerment, highly accountable empowerment. You are part of this team, you understand the mission, you have access to the right data in the moment you need it, therefore we expect you to take independent action. How can we scale that up into the enterprise was the question. We had thousands of people spread around the world trying to solve for this issue. So we changed almost everything. We changed our communication process, our culture, a whole background in how we got there. But the first thing we did was similar to what we see in many other organizations. We made this sort of common move of let's flatten ourselves out. Flat is fast. Flat works really well if it's 10 people meeting for coffee every morning, or 30 people in the same space. When it's thousands of people spread around the world, it just means the executives don't sleep because everyone has access to senior leaders all the time. And that's so easy to do in the information age, as we all know. But we went down that road. We said, okay, we've got this great central headquarters. We've got exceptional teams on the ground that operate as networks themselves. They are out there identifying threats on the ground. So let's flatten and share that information up, and central leadership will decide how to redesign ourselves. We'll move those teams around based on where we see problems. Teams move, identify issues, report back, move again. What we didn't realize was fighting a network through a traditional methodology actually forces it to change faster than it might on its own. Because it doesn't have an essential strategy, it's only reacting to the input, and we were the input. So every time we shifted, not only did the problem get out of our way, it multiplied. And that's when we stood back and said, okay, we have to operate through that same lens. The problem is here. We have to connect these teams on the ground so that they can share information in real time and then make independent decisions based on what they've just learned. That's a culture change. That's far deeper than any new methodology for how you're going to communicate. You have to create a level of trust between these teams and give them the process to share information. So we realized a much bigger issue than we thought we might be facing. Ultimately, what we were solving for was this question: is this the dominant system going forward and we just have to figure out how to leverage technology? Or is it completely dated and we're now in a networked world and that's what's going to run the next 100 years? I would argue for now, we're in the middle. We created this hybrid structure that allowed us to leverage the strength of hierarchies and move as networks when necessary. So, some brief thoughts on how that manifested into our thinking, which is what I think is most relevant to this audience here. Every organization tries to solve for issues, right? In our world, in the previous life, you're looking for threats around the world. So you identify a problem, and you try to find what it might be. Right? You can map this over to any sort of problem-solving methodology. Once you've found what that issue is, you then try to fix it in time and space, get clarity around that, and you're deepening your understanding of what it might be. Then you get to the point where you can go out and actually address this issue. You finish the problem. This is a SEAL platoon taking action. This is a medical team walking into an operating room. And you could see the parallels in your world as well. You learn new information. You exploit that very quickly in the moment. What did we think and what do we now know based on what just happened? You're deepening your understanding once again. Then you push that information up to the broader organization, and senior leaders, strategic leaders, et cetera, will analyze that against broader strategy and all other input variables. And once again, you've furthered your understanding. It's just a nice linear model. We didn't design this in the military. We've just learned how to leverage it quite well for generations. Then when you're done analyzing, you push that new insight all the way back to the beginning, and you go again. The question is, how many of those lines can you run at once? And you can do that through a bureaucratic model by scaling. Just get bigger and run more parallel lines. And eventually, you will take over the country, compete against your competition more effectively. This manifests in all different ways depending on the industry, but the model is quite normal. The realization was, for us, every time we move through this cycle, we're actually asking different parts of the organization to do their own linear process and then push that across to others. This can be inside one large organization or between channel partners. There's lots of ways you see this play out. That's worked quite well for generations because everybody was playing the game the same way. So it goes from A to B to C to D. You refine, you deepen your understanding, you take action. Do that better than the competition, and eventually you'll win. The issue is, these are naturally very siloed organizations, parts of the same enterprise, partners that are important. So there's a blink, as we started to refer to them, between each one of these stages. In your world, that blink might be days, it might be weeks, it might be 6 minutes. Depending how fast the competition is moving, that 6 minutes may be life or death. And that's where we found that we were at an impasse. This argues for a significant organizational and cultural redesign in this methodology. So fortunately, we had the right leadership in place that said, we are addressing an interconnected network. So we have to shift our mindset from linear to circular. We have to put these problems at the middle of all of our equities. It's not enough to just do your job really well and then send the email to the next group or give them the latest intelligence and then walk back into your cubicle. Because in that moment, that disconnect, the network problem has changed 6 times. we'll never get ahead of this problem if we keep doing what we know is the right thing for a previous generation. So let's start to look at it like this. We find things, we fix them in location, we send out a finished force, we learn new information, we push that up into strategy, we repeat that cycle. But it's continuous, it's circular, and all of us need to be as interconnected as that network threat on the ground. Now you can stack up and down, left and right, on top of that center X, a global network of problems, or opportunities, or competition. Whatever that may look like in your space, accepting the fact that there are networked issues that your team needs to circle around. Because as I'm in the middle of my fix stage, you may be in the middle of an exploit stage on the other side of the world. And that information matters to both of us in real time. So you have to break down that linear tribal mentality. And this is the model that got us there, right? Sort of a hybrid structure between these two systems. Now, the other big shift that I'll share with you and then leave you to the rest of the day here is a change in the mentality around where the main effort sits in a cycle like this. Historically, certainly in our world and in many industries, this is where the main effort sits, the finish. Who's the team going out on the ground and doing the thing, right? Who are the soldiers getting on a helicopter? Who is the physician walking into the operating room? Who is the sales lead closing the deal? You see that everywhere. This is what we make movies about, we write books about. We glorify this to a dangerous level in a networked environment. So our leaders hit us over the head with this and said, for generations, this is where we put all the equities in the organization. But that has to change. Our new main effort sits at the bottom of this. Whatever organization, whatever teams can exploit and analyze information and share that across traditional boundaries so that my data becomes your knowledge and insight as near instantaneously as possible, that's who wins in a networked age. Which is why this is a culture shift, right? Because there's ego, there's personal equities, there's a history that changes our thinking when we ask us to shift from the finish model to the exploitation and analysis of data and how quickly we can share that to solve problems collectively. So, hopefully you see some connections there. It may be counterintuitive, that's the big takeaway from a career in special operations. But for me, nothing has been more lasting than thinking about how the organization actually functioned. And I think that's the greatest parallel over into the space that all of you find yourselves in. So I hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and thank you for the time.